Hi everyone, my name is Freddie Ramos and my presentation is on lysergic acid diethylamide, which is also known as LSD and most commonly known as a tab acid doses or L. LSD was first synthesized in 1938 as an experiment when a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann was researching a way to make blood stimulants. He was working on a parasitic fungus known as ergot, which grows on rye, also a bread, and he had extracted the LSD without realizing, and he didn't end up finding anything for the blood stimulants. And it wasn't until 1943 that Hoffman accidentally ingested some of the LSD, and he thinks that was by putting his finger on his mouth at some point. And he went home, felt dizzy and restless, and he couldn't shake the feeling, and he realized that something had happened. So he went back the next day and took more of the LSD at a much higher dose. He didn't feel well, so he had his assistant call the doctor, and the only thing the doctor could find was that his pupils were dilated. His heart rate and blood pressure were unaffected. He had described the second experience as euphoric and also a dreamlike state, and he said he saw things and described it like a kaleidoscope of colors. He published his results and became known LSD and became popular in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. It was popularized in the 1960s when a psychologist, Timothy Leary, had encouraged American students to turn on, tune in, and drop out, a famous slogan in the drug scene. This created an entire counterculture of drug abuse and spread the drug from America to the United Kingdom and to the rest of Europe. Then, in a trial in 1963, they had used LSD combined with counseling to reduce anxiety, depression, and pain in advanced stage cancer patients. And that was then followed by studies with more than 100 advanced staged cancer patients, which established a new approach and demonstrated safety and promising results. The way LSD works is that it interacts with proteins on the surface of brain cells known as serotonin receptors. And serotonin is a chemical messenger that helps brain cells communicate. Most people know it as the happy chemical. LSD appears to act through a particular receptor called 5-HT2AR, which activates two major signaling pathways within cells, through G proteins and through B arrestins. The researchers found that LSD binds its receptor in a way that causes mostly the B arrestin pathway to be affected instead of the G protein pathway. They also found out that the serotonin receptor closes a lid over the LSD molecule, which prevents it from quickly detaching. This likely explains the long effects that LSD can have on a person. Usually you'll feel an effect in about 30 to 90 minutes after ingesting the drug. You will feel mood changes, and if you take it at a high enough dose, you'll start to hallucinate. It's one of the strongest hallucinogens out there. And physically, your body temperature increases, you begin to sweat, you lose your appetite, get a dry mouth, and have a higher heart rate. Other effects of the drug may include impaired time perception, impaired visuals, which usually consist of heightened sounds, seeing more colors, and feeling more things physically. The increased dosage can lead to a similar synesthesia condition where people hear colors and see sounds, and you can also feel certain things at the same time. On the other hand, though, some people may experience panic and lose control of their feelings and start to spiral out, and this is known as a bad trip in the drug scene. Average time of feeling the drug is about 4 to 6 hours, and longer trips may last up to 10 hours. The brain scans on the left are showing the placebo effect, which is a small dosage, versus a large dosage, which is measured in micrograms. So the bottom one would be around 200 micrograms, which is what the average dose is, average to high dose. So it showed that information is drawn from many parts of the brain and not just the visual cortex. And that the drug, regions that were once segregated spoke to one another, versus people that had not taken the drug. It affects mostly the prefrontal cortex, which is the area that is responsible for mood, cognition, and perception, as well as regulating arousal and physiological responses to stress and panic. This is why you hallucinate on the drug and may even panic while you're on it. The effects of hallucinogens like LSD can show a drug-induced psychosis, which distorts and disorganizes a person's capacity to think rationally and communicate with others. The brain scans also revealed that more areas of the brain than normal were contributing to visual processing. This meant that even when the volunteers' eyes were closed, they had seen things that you can't normally see. The more prominent the dosage, the more intense the dreamlike visions were. And this led people to believe that it could lead the pathway to treat psychiatric disorders. So some of the uses of the drugs include midwives in the Middle Ages, and they would give it to pregnant women in order to speed up labor. And they don't give LSD, they just give ergot, which is what it's extracted from, the fungus. And doctors still can prescribe ergot to a woman in labor. And then in the 1950s and 1960s, the military thought of it as a potential chemical weapon, and they would use it to confuse and change the personalities of intelligent targets in order to get information. It had then been banned in 1967 and declined use, but it picked up again in the 90s. And then now it's mostly seen in raves and dance clubs in older teens and young adults for people to dance freely and to think more openly. It was used by psychiatrists through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and they didn't discover any medical use for the drug, but they gave out free samples from the pharmaceutical companies, so that ended up leading to the broad use of the drug. Any questions?